Most people believe a backyard garden will always beat a few pots on a patio, but that's not quite true. In fact, a handful of well-managed containers can outproduce a patch of ground 3 times their size. Smaller space, less weeding, and often far more food per square foot. That sounds backwards, but it isn't. It comes down to control. In a pot, you control the soil, the water, the roots, and the feeding in a way you simply can't out in the open ground. And once you understand a few simple levers, you can take a tired, half-producing container and roughly double what it gives you in a single season. So picture your own space for a second. A balcony, a back step, a sunny windowsill, a couple of pots that did okay last year but never really thrilled you. Today we're walking through 10 tips to double your yield from potted plants. Some of them you've heard before but have been doing slightly wrong. A couple of them will genuinely surprise you. And the very last one is the one most gardeners completely overlook, even though it costs nothing and works on almost everything you grow. Before we start, do something small for me. Drop your growing zone in the comments and tell me which direction your balcony or main window faces. North, south, east, or west. It matters more than you'd think, and I'll tell you exactly why a little later. So let's get started. Let's begin with the foundation, because everything else sits on top of it. The first tip is simple. Stop filling your pots with garden soil. Most people assume dirt is dirt. If it grows weeds in the yard, it should grow tomatoes in a pot. It feels thrifty, it feels natural, and it quietly strangles your plants. Here's what's really happening down in that container. Real garden soil is full of fine clay and silt particles. Out in the open ground, those particles are part of a huge living system with worms and roots and channels that keep air moving. But scoop that same soil into a pot and it compacts. It packs down tight like a wet sponge that never quite dries. The tiny air pockets collapse, and roots, which need to breathe just as much as they need to drink, begin to suffocate. That's why a plant in garden soil so often looks sad in a pot for no obvious reason. Yellowing leaves, stunted growth, roots sitting in cold, airless muck. What you want instead is a light, fluffy potting mix. Something with peat or coconut coir, perlite or pine bark, the kind of blend that holds moisture but still lets air slip through. Run your fingers through it and it should feel loose, almost springy. That structure is what lets roots stretch out, grab oxygen, and feed fast. You don't need the most expensive bag on the shelf. A basic, well-draining mix beats premium garden soil every single time in a container. Get this one thing right and you've already set yourself up to grow more before you plant a single seed. And that leads straight into the next problem, because even the best potting mix has one weakness you have to plan around. The second tip is to feed little and often, not big and rarely. Here's the part most people never learn. That same loose, fast-draining mix that lets your roots breathe also lets nutrients wash straight out the bottom. Every time you water, a little fertility leaves with the runoff. Penn State Extension has pointed this out for years. Nutrients leach from containers far faster than they ever do from open ground. So out in a garden bed, a plant has a giant pantry of soil to pull from. In a pot, that pantry is small, and you're rinsing it out a little every day. Most people respond to this in the worst possible way. They dump a big scoop of fertilizer in once, early in the season, feel good about it, and then watch their plants run out of steam by midsummer. The leaves go pale, the flowers slow down, the fruit gets small. The fix is gentle and steady. Think of it like feeding the plant small meals instead of one giant feast it can't finish. A diluted liquid feed every week or two during the growing season keeps the tank topped up. Half strength, more often, is almost always better than full strength, once in a while. If you prefer something slower, mix a granular, slow-release fertilizer into the soil at planting time, and then support it with a light liquid feed when the plant starts setting fruit. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, anything that has to build actual food for you, those are heavy feeders. They'll reward steady nutrition with a noticeably bigger harvest. And once the food is sorted, we run straight into the thing that quietly limits more container gardeners than anything else. If you find yourself wanting to go deeper on all of this, the feeding schedules, the soil recipes, the exact levers that turn a struggling container into a genuinely productive one, I've put everything I know into a book called The Container Harvest. It covers the full system from soil to harvest in plain, practical language you can take straight outside and use the same day. It's available for $97, and you'll find the link in the description at quiet-farm-living.com. A lot of readers have told me it changed the way they look at a small space entirely. But all the water and food in the world won't help if the plant isn't catching enough light. Which brings us to that question I asked you at the start. The third tip is about water, and specifically about keeping it even. Most people think the danger with pots is forgetting to water. And yes, a pot dries out faster than the ground. But the real yield killer isn't dryness alone. It's the swing. Bone dry one day, soak the next, then bone dry again. That violent back and forth is what wrecks your harvest. Let me show you why it matters so much. When a tomato or a pepper goes through a hard drought and then a flood, the plant can't move calcium properly through its tissues. The result is blossom end rot, that ugly sunken brown patch on the bottom of the fruit. People blame their soil. They blame disease. Most of the time, it's simply uneven watering. Inconsistent moisture also makes leafy greens turn bitter and bolt early, and it makes the whole plant stressed and slow. So the goal isn't more water, it's steadier water. You want that soil to stay evenly moist, like a wrung-out sponge, not swinging between desert and swamp. There are 3 easy ways to get there, and you may already own everything you need. First, mulch the top of your pots. A ½ inch of straw, shredded leaves, or even bark chips on the soil surface dramatically slows evaporation. People mulch garden beds all the time and forget their containers, which actually need it more. Second, use a bigger pot because more soil holds more water and buffers the swings. We'll come back to that because it's bigger than you think. And third, consider a self-watering container, which is just a pot with a water reservoir in the bottom. The plant sips up exactly what it needs, and your moisture stays beautifully even with far less effort from you. Get your watering steady, and a whole category of problems just quietly disappears. The fourth tip is to chase the sun and to be honest with yourself about how much you actually get. This is where your balcony direction comes in. In the northern hemisphere, a south-facing spot gets the most sun through the day. West-facing gets strong afternoon light. East-facing gets gentler morning light. And a north-facing spot gets the least direct sun of all. Most people dramatically overestimate how much sun their space gets. They glance out at a bright balcony and assume it's full sun. But fruiting vegetables, your tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and squash generally want 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight to produce a real harvest. Anything less, and the plant spends its energy just staying alive instead of making food for you. Here's the trick that changes everything. Because your plants are in pots, they're portable. A garden bed is stuck where you dug it. A pot is not. You can move it into the light. You can chase the sun across your balcony through the day. You can lift a struggling pepper out of a shady corner and set it where the afternoon sun pours in. A cheap plant caddy with wheels turns a heavy pot into something you can roll around with one hand. And if you genuinely only have a shadier north-facing space, don't fight it. Lean into leafy crops. Lettuce, spinach, kale, chard, parsley, mint, and many herbs will happily produce in 4 or 5 hours of softer light where a tomato would just sulk. Match the plant to the light you actually have, and you stop wasting a whole season on a crop that was never going to fruit in that corner. And now we get to the single biggest physical lever you can pull, the one that quietly doubles harvests on its own. The 5th tip is to go bigger with your pots, much bigger than feels normal. Most people pick a pot based on how the plant looks the day they buy it. A small seedling goes into a small pot because it looks right. But that little plant is going to grow, and the pot you choose is, in a very real sense, choosing your harvest for you before the season even starts. Here's the science, and it's remarkable. A large research review by Porter and colleagues, published in 2012, gathered together dozens of studies on pot size. On average, every time they doubled the size of the pot, the plants grew about 43% bigger. Same plant, same care, same everything. Just more room for the roots and nearly half again as much growth. Think about what that means for food. A bigger root system can pull in more water and more nutrients, support more leaves, and those leaves are the solar panels that build your fruit. Cramp the roots, and you cap the whole plant. Free the roots, and the plant climbs. This is why a tomato in a tiny pot gives you a handful of sad little fruits, while the same variety in a 15 or 20-gallon container can give you buckets. For most fruiting vegetables, think 5 gallons as an absolute minimum, and 10, 15, or 20 gallons if you can manage it. For a single tomato or a pepper, you almost cannot go too big. And here's the quiet part nobody likes to say. The garden industry is happy to sell you neat little matching pots that look lovely and limit your yield. Nature doesn't care how it looks. The roots just want room. A big, plain, cheap container will outproduce a small, pretty one every single time. So if you only change one thing this weekend, size up. And that connects beautifully to the next tip, because it's not just how big the pot is, it's what the pot does to the roots. The 6th tip is to grow in fabric pots and let the air do something clever. Most people use plastic pots and never question it. They're cheap, they last, they're everywhere. But a hard plastic pot has a hidden problem. When a root reaches the smooth inner wall, it can't go anywhere, so it turns and circles. Around and around it goes until the whole root ball becomes a tight, choked spiral. Gardeners call it being root-bound, and it slowly throttles the plant. Now picture a fabric pot, the kind made of breathable cloth. When a root grows out toward that fabric wall, it reaches the edge, senses the dry air on the other side, and simply stops growing longer. Instead, the plant sends out lots of new branching roots further back. It's called air pruning, and the result is a dense, fibrous, healthy root system with far more feeding tips. Instead of one frustrated spiral, more feeding roots means more uptake, which means more growth and more food. Fabric pots also breathe, so the soil gets more oxygen and drains better, which loops right back to that breathing roots idea. from the very first tip. They're harder to overwater, and the roots stay cooler on a blazing day. You can buy fabric grow bags very cheaply, and they fold flat to store over winter. If you're stuck with plastic pots, you can fake some of the benefit by drilling a few extra holes around the lower sides, not just the bottom, to let in a little more air. It's not quite the same, but it helps. So we've fed the plant, watered it evenly, given it light and room and air. Now we have a big, healthy, leafy plant. But leaves aren't dinner. Flowers and fruit are. And that's where the next tip comes in. The 7th tip is to take pollination into your own hands. Most people assume pollination just happens out in a big open garden surrounded by other plants. It mostly does. Bees and wind do the work for you. But up on a 3rd floor balcony, or on an enclosed patio, or near a busy street, far fewer pollinators find their way to your flowers. And a flower that never gets pollinated never becomes a fruit. It just yellows, wilts, and drops. This quietly costs container gardeners an enormous amount of food. You see the plant blooming beautifully, you get excited, and then flower after flower simply falls off. People panic and blame their watering or their feeding, when the real issue is that nobody delivered the pollen. The fix takes about 30 seconds a day, and it feels almost too simple. For tomatoes and peppers, whose flowers hold everything they need inside themselves, you just need to shake them. Give the plant a gentle flick of the stem, or hold an electric toothbrush to the back of the flower for a second. That little vibration releases the pollen inside, and fruit set jumps. Greenhouse growers do exactly this with vibrating wands, because it works. For squash, cucumbers, and zucchini, which have separate male and female flowers, you can play matchmaker. Pick a male flower, the one on a plain thin stem, peel back its petals, and gently dab its center against the center of a female flower, the one with a tiny fruit already swelling at its base. One touch, and you've done the bee's whole job. A few minutes of this through flowering season can be the difference between a plant covered in fruit and a plant covered in disappointment. And once the fruit is setting, the next tip helps the plant pour everything into it. The 8th tip is to prune with purpose, because sometimes growing more starts with removing some. This one feels wrong at first. You worked hard to grow that plant. Why on earth would you cut bits off it? But strategic pruning is one of the oldest tricks for bigger harvests, and it works on a beautifully simple idea. A plant only has so much energy. Every part you let it keep is a mouth it has to feed. Trim the parts that don't pay you back, and all that energy flows into the parts that do. If you grow indeterminate tomatoes, the tall kind that keep climbing all season, look for the little shoots that sprout in the joint between the main stem and a leaf branch. Those are suckers. Left alone, each one becomes a whole new sprawling stem, and the plant turns into a tangled jungle that pours its energy into leaves and air instead of fruit. Pinch a few of those suckers out while they're small, and the plant focuses its strength on ripening the fruit you actually want. In a container especially, a tidy, well-pruned tomato gives you bigger, faster ripening fruit than a wild one. Here's the part that matters for everyone, not just the pot growers. If you already have an in-ground garden and you're wondering whether any of this applies to you, this tip is yours too. Walk out this weekend, find the lower leaves on your tomatoes that are touching or splattered with soil, and snip them off. Those low leaves are the highway that soil-borne disease climbs into your plant. Removing them improves airflow and cuts disease in a pot or in the ground, with nothing but a pair of scissors you already own. The same goes for pinching the first few flowers off a very young pepper plant. so it builds a strong frame before it fruits. These small cuts pay you back all season long, no matter how or where you grow. So we've shaped the plant above the soil. Now let's go below it to something most people never think about at all. The 9th tip is to feed the life in your soil, not just the plant. Most people picture soil as a dead brown filler, something to hold the roots in place while the fertilizer does the real work. But healthy soil is alive, and in a container, that living network is a secret partner in your harvest. The star here is something called mycorrhizal fungi. It's a mouthful, but the idea is simple and almost magical. These are tiny, friendly fungi that attach themselves to plant roots and then stretch their own ultra-fine threads far out into the soil, much finer and farther than roots can reach. They act like an extension of the root system. They go hunting for water and nutrients, especially phosphorus, and they deliver those goods back to your plant. In return, the plant shares a little sugar. Both sides win. In a container where the soil volume is limited and the roots can only explore so far, that extended fungal network is a real advantage. It helps the plant find more of the food and water that's already in the pot. You can buy mycorrhizal inoculant cheaply as a little powder and dust it right onto the roots or into the planting hole when you set your plant in. One application at planting time, and the partnership builds itself from there. You can support that same living soil with a handful of good compost or worm castings mixed into your mix. It feeds the microbes, improves the structure, and releases nutrients slowly and gently. A teaspoon of worm castings is full of biology that helps your plant stand up to stress. So we've covered soil, food, water, light, pot size, air, pollination, pruning, and the living world beneath the surface. Every one of those can lift your harvest. But the tip that beats them all is the one almost nobody does on purpose, and it costs you absolutely nothing. And that brings us to number 1. The most powerful tip to double your yield is this: harvest early and harvest often. It sounds too simple to matter. It might even sound backwards. How can picking your food sooner give you more food? But this single habit changes the way the plant behaves, and once you understand it, you'll never garden the same way again. Here's the secret hiding in plain sight. A vegetable plant is not trying to feed you. It's trying to make seeds. That's its entire reason for existing. Every fruit it produces is really just a package designed to carry mature seeds out into the world. And here's the key. The moment a plant succeeds, the moment it's allowed to ripen a fruit fully and finish its seeds, it gets a powerful signal that says, the job is done. You can slow down now, and it does. Production drops because the plant believes its life's work is complete. So when you leave that giant zucchini on the vine, or let those beans swell up fat and tough, or let cucumbers turn yellow, you're not just getting one oversized vegetable, you're telling the entire plant to stop making more. But if you pick early and pick often, you never let the plant finish. You keep removing the fruit before the seeds mature, and the plant keeps thinking, I haven't made my seeds yet. I have to try again. So it flowers again. It fruits again. It keeps pouring out food in a desperate, generous loop, all because you kept quietly moving the finish line. The numbers on this are striking. Crops like beans, cucumbers, zucchini, peppers, and many leafy greens will produce dramatically more over a season if you keep them picked clean. A bean plant kept picked can produce for weeks longer than one allowed to set mature pods. Pick your zucchini young, at 6 or 7 inches, when it's tender and sweet, and a single plant will keep cranking them out. Snip leaf lettuce, from the outside, leaf by leaf, instead of pulling the whole head, and one plant feeds you again and again. So get in the habit of walking your pots every day or two with a basket or a pair of scissors. Pick a little before things look fully done. Tender beans, young zucchini, bright firm peppers, outer leaves of greens. You'll eat better because young produce tastes sweeter and more tender, and you'll harvest far more because the plant never gets the signal to quit. That's the quiet magic of it. The more you take, the more it gives. No equipment, no expense. Just a small, regular habit that keeps your plants generous right up until the frost. And when you step back and put all 10 of these together, something becomes clear. None of them is about having more land. None of them is about working harder or spending more or buying some clever gadget the catalogs want to sell you. It's all about using a small space intelligently, the right soil that lets roots breathe, gentle, steady feeding, and even water. Real sunlight, a generous pot, and air around the roots, a little help with pollination, a thoughtful cut here and there, a living soil beneath it all, and the simple, patient habit of harvesting often. That's the whole secret. Successful container growing was never about square footage. It was about understanding what the plant actually needs and then giving it exactly that in the space you already have. Because the goal here isn't a perfect garden. It's a consistent one. A few well-tended pots that quietly feed you, season after season, without taking over your life. That's a deeply satisfying thing. Growing real food with your own hands, simply in whatever corner of light you've got. If that's you, if you'd rather grow good food the smart, simple way than overspend and overwork for it, then you're in the right place. So here's what I'd love you to do. Go back to that question from the start. Tell me your growing zone and which direction your balcony or window faces, north, south, east, or west. Drop it in the comments right now, because that one detail shapes everything you can grow, and I read them and reply. Don't just think the answer, type it. And if these ideas brought a little calm and a little clarity to the way you grow, consider subscribing and growing alongside a quiet community of people who are learning to grow more with less. Less space, less money, less fuss, more food. Because next time, we're going to look at the handful of vegetables that actually prefer a pot to the open ground, and one of them keeps producing for years from a single planting. You won't want to miss which one. Until then, keep it simple, keep it steady, and enjoy the quiet pleasure of watching something you planted feed you. I'm so glad you stuck with me to the end. This video gave you the overview, but inside the circle, I pick up right where we just stopped with the full container plan for every crop. You can ask me your own questions, and I answer you myself. No robots. You belong here, growing alongside me. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen, and you can cancel anytime with one click. Now that you know how to boost your harvest, let me show you which 15 vegetables and herbs actually grow better in pots than in the ground. It's starting right here, so stay with me.